Thank you very much, Stefan, for the wonderfully erudite overview of how a political ecology of energy, energy transition and energy vulnerability may look like. Thank you. The floor is yours. Alice?
I'd like to ask you, at one point of your talk, you presented a process of energy transition that, if I understood correct, linearly leads to a renewable future. And I was wondering, nowadays, in the context of the crisis that we're experiencing, especially in the EU, and all this debate about the return to coal and the high price of renewables, and the new fossil fuelism that starts with fracking and everything. Do you believe that we're, let's say, necessarily going to a green-less future, or these predictions might be cancelled?
Right, so I guess I didn't get that point across very, very clearly. So there's a guy called Dave Elliott's written about this and quite a few others, and basically the point I wanted to make, and I'll get to your question in a minute, which is it's very important and good, but the main point I want to make is ultimately one day, whether in 100 years or 1,000 years, we're going to end up having a renewable society, renewable energy society. It's not. It's just a question of time, because there's just a very simple fact: fossil fuels are limited, so we can, they're physically limited. We may end up in a situation where we're just not going to use them, like with coal, or we're going to use them at a diminished rate. But ultimately, we're going to have to move to a renewable future. So we're going to come full circle, basically. As a society, as a global society, we're going to end up in the hunter-gatherer phase that we were before. We just have, obviously, we'll find ways, I guess, technologically or whatever, to harness that energy. But we're ending up at that point sooner or later. Now, what is interesting is how long and how, in what manner it will take us to get there, and that is a highly political question. And I mean, there's no simple answer to your question about where we're ending up. I don't personally see a situation where we're going to, where there'll be a resurgence, a massive resurgence of coal, or even a massive resurgence of gas in the European context. Of gas, or especially not nuclear. I mean, nuclear is completely out of the window. With gas, there is a rise in the availability of gas, of shale gas, because of the very, very specific situation in the United States, which led to a very massive increase in production there. But that has very much to do with the ownership arrangements, with the political context of the United States, which is quite unique. So you can't really have gas fracking in Europe, and nowhere near the scale that the United States has had it. So obviously there'll be a lot of gas in the global market, and that's a fuel that's going to stick around for a while. But we won't have a kind of massive revolution of gas. It's clearly going to be a very dominant fuel in the future. And I think also with coal, yes, I mean it's a fuel that's on the rise, and one thing that you're not hearing is how much coal there is now being burnt within Europe, because the price has gone down a lot, and we don't even need to dig it out of the ground. And there's a lot of coal even in the ground. We have, in Europe, even countries using their domestic supplies. There's, I think, what we call the reserve production ratio is about 350 years. So at current rates, there'd be plenty of coal around. But again, I just don't see a situation where that's going to happen, largely because of these climate arguments. I think what we are ending up really in the future is quite a mixed picture, where I think there's lots of local particularities of what is being used and how it's being used, and obviously that depends on very much the politics of the scale at which these resources are being used. But certainly, I would say the underlying trend everywhere is the increase in renewable energy. So renewable energy is the one thing that is increasing across Europe, across the developed world, and probably gases as well. But ultimately, I'm not very convinced that we kind of that's partly also part of this catastrophic scenario that we're going to end up with lots of coal and gas. That's something that a lot of, again, the nuclear lobby would like to say. I'm not entirely convinced about it.
I was especially listening to certain arguments because my ear is hearing some things but not other things. Like, for me, I come from Romania and I know how it is for a retired senior to be disconnected from heat because she cannot pay. Yeah, and I feel tremendous sorrow, right, for this kind of situation, like real situation, the way you showed in the beginning, real situation that is not, are not even shown in the media, or maybe sometimes are shown just like because they look so, oh my God, somebody died because it was cold, but it's not. I mean, working for an NGO in Romania, an environmental NGO, the discussion was limited to what kind of change are we going to do and how we all end up with renewables. But then again, there is no serious discussion about this idea of redistribution and this idea of access and this idea of poverty, these political issues that are trivialized. And where is the human in the discussion about this future? Even if it's a renewable future, the transition towards that is a killing process. And how do we talk about that?
Well, I mean, I just don't think that the two processes are exclusive. That's all. We don't have to accept the logic. I guess I didn't talk about that a lot of that dichotomy is that we have to pay massively for renewables, and as a result of that, the older person by the fire will suffer. I mean, what we're beginning to see, and what a lot of people are talking about, is that this new energy transition, can also involve a very radical reimagination of how we think of our energy provision. So if you want to think radically of what a different alternative to capitalism would be, that also involves a radical, so going back to your utopia work, Maria, it's that configuration, that sort of reconfiguration of our society needs to involve also the reconfiguration of our energy provision. So we have now lived in a society, basically since the middle of the 19th century, which has been dominated by large centralized power systems, where there is a complete disconnection between the producers or the providers of energy and the consumers of energy, where energy is something that, if I flick that switch, or somebody very far away has to, at that stage, know that I've decided to do that, which is an immensely, if you think about it, it's an immensely technologically advanced kind of thing, to be able to actually predict people's behaviors if they flick a switch, because you don't store electricity, you have to provide it at that stage. So that kind of, one of the arguments that has been put forward is that potentially that kind of thinking can fall apart in a different alternative energy future. In an energy future where the provision of energy is much more local, much more direct to the consumer. Because if you think about it, renewable energy is all around us. If I go outside, there'll be some renewable energy. There'll be a possibility for me to access it.
It's just that from your presentation, I felt like this transition would actually be captured by just certain, another power interests, instead of being a radical imaginary that would also involve the entire society.
Well, no, I mean, it doesn't have to be, that's what I'm saying. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It's open at this stage. Where we're going now is not determined. the path of our future transformation is not determined. We are now in a position to seize that. That's the difference between the previous transitions and this one. This transition does not have a clear destination, as it were. So I think what we need to do is we need to be explicitly aware that that can be captured by us. It's not something we're at the moment aware of.
But is this transition addressed in terms of class access, right? That's what I'm asking.
Not necessarily. Some are. I mean, I am, but not everyone.
There are also people who are asking questions, so you can
Sorry,
the discussion of the
I'm going to be very brief.
Next. Well, who's next?
Yes, thank you.
Giving them in sequence. Yeah.
I sympathize with your argument when you said there is enough energy around, but it's not equally distributed. So we have to redistribute it better. So, I mean, I get the point, and I think it's important to talk about inequalities and distribution, but I felt a little bit that your narrative, while it was making interesting points here and there was a little bit, there was lacking an overall cohesion of how do we approach this question of inequality at the global level between countries, because the two levels were mixed, and within each country. I don't know how we can provide a more cohesive narrative, but just to ask two questions that I have to show what I see as a little bit problematic in the way this narrative was presented. So the first one is about at the global level. We talked about quantities of energy, okay, but this assumes somehow that there is a common, you said you used also the word global commons of energy that somehow can be redistributed better. Well, this is not the case. I mean, it's not that the Americans are taking the energy and don't let the Africans access it. Everyone can access it at the same price as the market. The differences in energy consumption between the Americans and the Africans is the difference in the level of growth in each country, which leads to different levels of consumption. So it's not energy that has to be redistributed, many other things that will lead to more energy consumption, but this will not be a redistribution. It will be like what the economists call growth and convergence. So I don't see anything particular about energy or about redistribution there. And I can't also see politically what might it mean to have a global energy agency that will say to the Americans, you're not taking any more of your energy, and we give it to the Africans, because that's not the problem, right? So one problem I had is with this narrative at the global level about the global commons of energy. Then at the domestic level, again I had a problem in the sense that then the problem stops being one of quantity. So it's not that an American who is, you called about the global underclass, right? So the American who is an underclass in New York in terms of energy because he doesn't have enough energy, probably he uses as much energy in physical terms as the rich African. Sorry for this stereotyping, but just to make the examples clear now. So he's using probably more energy than not the richest African, but the middle class or towards the rich African. So then it becomes a relative issue. It's no longer a quantity or universal issue. So it's an underclass because of insecurity in relation to a positional consumption. So it is an underclass, not because he doesn't have enough perhaps for heating or cooking at a certain level of basic needs, but because he has much less access than a rich American who lives down the corner, and because he has the insecurity that at any moment he might have much less energy and fall into a social hole, let's say, which you are poor, you don't have energy in your house, you can't even heat yourself. But then it becomes like a relative issue of positional consumption rather than of absolute quantities of energy. So I think unless we tackle a little bit these differences, we fall a little bit, it's difficult to escape the main narrative, which is let's produce more energy so that everyone has more energy and then we grow and converge, which is the standard narrative at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I mean that's some great questions. The one issue I have with trying to articulate an argument here is that we don't have the luxury in energy of being very prescriptive or very ideological, because of the current possibilities being so open. Any kind of taking sometimes a perspective means that then that perspective gets bastardized and then becomes again used for very narrow political ends. And I've had that in many cases when I've talked about particular types of, let's say, rights with respect to energy consumption. So I mean, I've deliberately kept this quite open and not perhaps very prescriptive, because I think it then becomes very dangerous if you come into territory when you start drawing the same lines and fences and you enter the same logic that you're trying to critique. So for me, the most important process in all of this, the one thing that I always emphasize, is the need for democracy. the need for open discussion, the need for not foreclosing the possibilities around the energy system. And I guess perhaps I didn't talk about that enough, but the way that we are at the moment as energy consumers in the developed world, the way that we operate is we just don't have the possibility to participate in energy-related decisions. The decisions are made somewhere very high up in the government between a utility and a government representative, yet they affect our materialities, our everyday future. So the one thing we do need at the moment is a radical form of democracy around energy. So for me, the question of then how we do the redistribution, of why, what the actual technicalities of this redistribution are, and whether we need to produce more energy or less energy, is much less important. For me, the most important thing at this moment is that we do not have a global political commons, a global political understanding around the question of an underclass. So for me, that would be the first priority. I would then later want to think about how we want to redistribute. And there are different modalities of how a redistribution or a global redistribution model would work. And we can discuss that later if you like. I don't want to get into the details, but certainly all kinds of possibilities have been discussed. The problem is the moment you put one option on the table, then it attracts its own politics. If you say allowances or this or that, then it becomes the politics of rationing, blah, 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 and then all of a sudden that brings in all sorts of debates. You're very right about the second thing, and I firmly believe in the situation as it is at the moment. Absolutely, energy consumption is relative and positional. What energy consumption needs to do is it needs to allow you to participate fully in the customs that define membership of society. If your energy access situation does not allow you to access to become a fully functioning member of society, going back to Amartya said, then we have a problem. So again, I don't want to be going into the finesses of that, but then I think the interesting question is, what is membership of society? Do we have a global society, or a local society, or a national society? When you're talking about the individual or the agent, what is the spatial scale to which you are referring? And then I think that kind of is a way to start addressing the problem. But I wouldn't want to go into prescriptions, but I would agree with you, which is you can never think, certainly when there's no global standard, there's no global membership of society, global level, you cannot think of an absolute level of consumption. You must think of it as relative and positional.
Yeah, I think I'm going to the same topic, like the amount of energy. I mean, for me, this is central. We need to talk about we need to talk about distribution and transitions, but still we need to talk about the amount of energy. I mean, the increasing global demand, this is central for capitalism, and probably this is what has, you say that the society we have is built on burning energy, and this big amount of energy always increasing. So no decline of coal in the world level at any time. So, and going to where it stopped yesterday, I mean, this increasing amount of energy is what's pushing forward this urbanization. So, and still, this urbanization to the most remote corners of the world and to all cultural minorities in the world. So for me, this is central. We need to talk about the amount of energy. And still, then if we talk about distribution, then you have these problems like in Ecuador and all these countries in South America, where distribution is getting much better, but still you have this increasing environmental conflicts with indigenous peoples in the Amazon and so on. So, yeah. So still for me, the amount of energy is central, and we need to talk about this. And then the other one I want to comment is just a minor point for the previous discussion we had here this morning, was when we were discussing about the importance of having more people from the experimental sciences on board in political ecology. So it's really just a minor thing, but I really want to add. For instance, the influenza outbreaks that probably lead to these higher mortality rates are more related to crowded places like schools, and then this influenza spreading all over the society than to winter. So we really need to have all these other scientists here. So we really framework the research in taking everything into account. So this is just a call for more interdisciplinarity in political ecology.
I just very briefly comment on your first point, which I don't think I quite fully understood, but anyway, yes, the amount of energy. I mean, there's a funny relationship between energy and capitalism. You can think of energy much more as a symptom of capitalism rather than the cause of capitalism. So the availability of energy and the employment of energy allows for the conditions of capitalist production, and then the generation of the various processes, flows, contradictions, etc. that capitalism leads to. But the actual patterns of energy use then are a symptom of the problems of capitalism. So saying, oh, we use too much energy, we use too much energy, there are these dichotomies and so on, is for me fundamentally flawed. So you can't, it's irrelevant in many ways to think of those things without understanding the underlying political conditions that create them. That's what my whole talk has been.